Hello, welcome to Season 9 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. The theme of this season is 100 Years of Horror. We're going to watch two horror movies from every decade, from 1920 to 2020, in chronological order. We want to see where horror came from, how it's changed, and maybe even make some predictions about where it's going. If you want to see the full list of movies we'll be reviewing this season and follow along, then check out our website at thehorrific.com. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Yeah, we're kind of changing it up this week. We're decided to drop a bonus episode just because we can. Yeah. And we actually got an email from a listener named Kate in Australia who said a lot of nice things to us, but also had some cool information about living near where the events that Wolf Creek was based on actually happened. And so I thought that was really cool. It was a really interesting tie-in. And then Kate also recommended Hell House LLC as a movie we should do, and we figured, why not?
Yeah. Well, that's our thing, as the manager of the podcast. You're the CEO, don't worry. I figured, hey, we can decide whatever we want to do as equal partners.
Right.
Because titles are just titles. I'm thinking about changing mine to governor.
There's no rules. I'm El Presidente.
Yeah, now that's the case. It's our podcast. But the thing is, we encourage the listeners to reach out to us and give us the recommendations. One, it makes our job a whole hell of a lot easier.
Yep. True.
And two, it helps us, get to know who's listening, what they want to hear. And it's like, when she recommended Hell House LLC, I hadn't heard it yet. And I was like, this sounds like something, like, why haven't we done this?
Right.
And so it's like, yeah, it was funny how it went down, because I messaged you on GChat and was like, hey, we got this recommendation. You want to do it, Tuesday? And you're like, yeah, absolutely. And it was just done.
Yeah.
It's like a beautiful transaction.
We're like a startup. We can move fast.
Yeah.
So you had not seen this one before?
Mm-mm.
Had you seen this one before?
No, I have not, actually.
I hadn't even heard of it, to be honest.
Right.
I did not know at all what I was getting into. And so that is an extra good recommendation, because it was something that was just completely not on our radar at all.
Yeah, no, we could have missed this movie. Like, not being dramatic, like, who knows if we would have watched this without that recommendation. So that's why I was super stoked on it.
You never know what horror movie is going to be your last horror movie. That's
true.
what horror movies teach us.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I will introduce it, and then you can do your fun facts, and then we'll get into the spooky details. In 2015, director Stephen Cognetti and producers Joe Bandelli and Matt De Piola unveiled Hell House LLC, a found-footage documentary-style horror movie about a group of friends who move to a small town in New York to open a haunted house attraction in an abandoned hotel. As it turns out, the scares they manufactured were nothing compared to those already inhabiting the hotel. Hell House LLC can currently be streamed on Amazon Prime Video at no extra cost for Prime members, which I appreciate.
I have to say, the fact that you said at no extra cost for Prime members is my favorite thing of that. So, here's a fact. This hotel doesn't technically exist in real life, but the whole movie was filmed at Waldorf Hotel in Leeton, Pennsylvania. Run by Angie Mayer. You may know her as Angie Moyer, who served as a film set designer.
So this is like an actual functioning hotel, or like an abandoned hotel?
This was an actual functioning hotel.
Wow. They really made it not look like that.
Waldorf Hotel. Yeah. It was just pretty interesting. So this is something that will tie into what I talk about here in a little bit, but I kind of appreciate it, so I wanted to bring in. But so lead actors Danny and Jared were the ones wearing clown costume and masks throughout the film. The mannequin that the clown mask was normally on wouldn't stand well. The person had to be standing still when in the costume. So they were wearing the costumes as mannequins because the mannequins didn't hold up too well. And I respect that because it's a DIY thing. Yeah. Could you go out and just fix it? Yeah. Or, hey, you're not in this scene. Can you put this costume on? Yeah. Done. Easy peasy.
I think it's creepier that way too. That's because true. When it's an actual human and it has actual human proportions, I think it makes it look more real.
Yeah. That's a good point. So my last fact. So there was, I have a little trouble finding facts on this, but the last fact that I actually read in multiple articles was that when a character came out running from like a strobe light, I think it was Paul. Paul comes running out. He was in a strobe light area and he throws up. Supposedly that was legit. He legit threw up.
Oh, just from the flashing light?
That's what I think, yeah.
Wow.
So, pretty interesting stuff. I mean, that's a legit throw-up scene we saw. If I knew that when watching, I probably would have threw up myself.
So yeah, I really enjoyed the format of this movie. It was set up, I thought, just amazingly well, like kind of a mid-level documentary film that has become kind of almost like cliche at this point. And, you know, they were so, I feel like they were probably like giggling to themselves about some of the stuff that they did just to make it seem even more almost like mimicking that style.
Yeah.
Because in the age of streaming, we all have a lot of access to a lot of documentaries, and not all of them were made on super high budgets. And so even just like kind of some of the hard edits while people are talking to the camera and stuff, it was just so like on point and in that genre. And I think it took, because Sarah didn't know what I was watching. She hadn't been paying attention when I was getting it pulled up and everything. And so it was probably 20 to 30 minutes in before she was really convinced that it wasn't a real documentary. And because I wouldn't tell her, she's like, is this real? And I'm like, yeah, as far as I know.
That's great.
But I just feel like they totally nailed the style. And that was really interesting because it gave them ways of like setting up those more like narration type shots and also working in a lot of the found footage. And it was kind of neat to have that sort of narration or outside or talking about the events from the future, because you got some of that like outside context to it and some of that like narrative structure that was a little bit harder to put together sometimes, or told a little bit bigger story than what you could have with like Blair Witch, where it's all on the video camera that they found after the fact, you know?
Yeah. I think so. First off, this came out 2015, and I don't think anyone could say anything that would make me think that Netflix didn't watch this and base most of their documentaries styles off of this film.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, man, like watching this, most of like the beginning of my notes is like, is this a Netflix documentary? Not complaining. I mean, I like them, but it's just like, is this Netflix, the format and standard? Like it really kind of hit home, because that's what Katie and I been watching a lot lately was, the Netflix documentaries, usually on real life murders.
Yep.
It's life. And I mean, I was convinced, like, it was just like this, whoever like did this film has to have something to do with Netflix, because like it was a similar format.
Yeah. No, for sure. And that's one thing too that I didn't really stop to think about, but it's almost like this is a format from which I am used to consuming information based on real life.
Right.
And so that almost helped a little bit with that kind of like suspension of disbelief, or letting yourself get pulled in, that is important for a horror movie. And I thought that was pretty effective. And especially because they didn't really go over the top with anything from there wasn't anything in an early scene where you were just like, well, that's ridiculous. This is all made up. They really eased their way into it with sort of the creepiness or everything. And a lot of it was just kind of reference from people that were there that night or that had read about it after the fact. And so you kind of have people like building up this feeling of this event that happened, kind of like we were talking about with Nosferatu, where the whole like journey to the castle the townspeople are talking about how like they stay away from that place and it's creepy and dangerous. Mm-hmm. And so you're just kind of like building that mood so that when the scary thing happens, it like really happens. And I thought that was doing that through this sort of like documentary format, and the way that they rolled out the story or revealed more about what was happening was a really good setup. And I was just along for the ride and I enjoyed it.
Yeah. I think for me, it was like, when I started it, it was like, wait, what are, kind of like, not frustrated, but just kind of confused. Like, wait, what? Like trying to figure out what was going on. And then once I kind of realized where we're getting at with the documentary style, and they started getting into, the actual, what happened there, is like, oh, okay, like this is, I see where they're going. And before we kind of get into like the meat of the movie, I do have to say, like, and I've said this multiple times, and I think you're probably on the same page, but like, I really appreciate like something that feels like a good DIY project.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And the fact that, that it didn't have like super known actors, and it seemed like, I don't know much about like the history of how it was made or anything. We're recording this a few days after we got the request, but you hadn't dived deep into it. But it just seemed like almost like a couple of horror fans were like, "Hey, we can do a found footage," and like, but they were like prepared. We're gonna do a found footage, but like, not try to make the people like super sick from like the camera shaking nonstop. Right. And, just a couple of the things that major film footage movies are known to do, to make, like, remember, you're watching, a found footage, that's why I'm shaking this camera. Like, they didn't have to do that, and, mm-hmm. They were able to produce a pretty legit, horror film. And I just appreciate that from the get-go. I appreciate any DIY, aspect of it. Like, you don't have to have the major backing to do what, what you want to do.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, but I also feel like a lot of times with horror movies, the more kind of grainy camera effects and stuff like help, mm-hmm. because you don't see the close-up details of like costuming or special effects that aren't particularly well done. But honestly, this one reminded me a lot of the first Paranormal Activity, in that it was pretty subtle for a lot of it, but it kind of built that creepiness, and then it had those kind of big payoff scenes. Yeah. And it was also a pretty relatable story. I mean, obviously, like, I'm not someone who has moved to a small town in New York to start a, Halloween haunted house attraction or anything, but just from the whole, like, friends who are working together on a thing, and then like weird stuff starts happening, and then they're dealing with these dynamics in the background, but they also have like the deadline of this opening that they're trying to weigh against it and everything. It just, I don't know, there wasn't anything about the scenario that felt like super unbelievable to me, or that like took me out of the flow of the movie. Yeah. And so I liked it, and like I said, I do think some of the big scary scenes really did pay off. And I think that, sort of the format of it helped that a lot. Because with found footage, a lot of times you almost feel like you're seeing or like you're present for something you weren't supposed to see, or like you're overhearing a conversation that you weren't supposed to be part of. And the fact that it was cast as like, this is all recovered film, from leading up to something bad happening, I think contributed to it. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, like, I definitely like the style of how it was, like the story itself, where it's like a documentary crew going in, trying to figure out what happened that day, and they were presented with this film footage, which, which you get more into, and that's what the movie ends up kind of being about. So it's kind of like it's almost split up in two different types of film. But when they have the documentary, it's like legit, like, they start talking about someone and they cut to a picture of the person, or, that kind of stuff that, like a, well done documentary. But then once it starts with like them getting that hotel, it's like just suspense, like immediate suspense. And it built up so much that, it built up the suspense so much, but so well that like I'm legit not just saying, like, there was a few scenes that like freaked me out. Yeah.
And we've watched hundreds of horror movies within the past 3 years, just doing this podcast alone. And it's one of the few that's like, gave me some creeps, you know, and so naturally it just kind of made me excited. However, I wondered if it was because the most recent movies we've done have been because of our, 1920s and 1930s horror movies, but we'll get to that.
We reacclimated ourselves a little bit.
I wondered if our taste changed a little bit, because I was like, there was a few times where I kind of had to do the Katie side eye squint, like I know a jump's coming, but I gotta be prepared for it. But it was just strictly off of their filmmaking, like the building the suspense, like you don't have to have a crazy special effects, like it's building that suspense that, like you said, they did, in the 20s. We verified that with Nosferatu. That's what happened. And it's still successful today.
Yeah, and I didn't feel like, every minute of this movie was, on the edge of your seat. But I do feel like it was paced pretty well. And when they introduced the more scary elements, the scenes really hit. And so, in general, that made it just an easy watch from start to finish, but kept your attention.
Yeah.
And I think the first scene that really stood out to me was when the guy is laying in bed talking to the camera, and then all of a sudden you have the silhouette in the background move while he's talking. And that's kind of like the first time something like legit creepy that you've seen. Like they've been talking about it the whole time, but now you actually see it and you're starting to kind of put together what the possibilities are for what could have gone down in the house. The payoff for that was so good, I thought. And the way that they just introduced it that subtly, I thought was great.
Yeah, it was like they subtly introduced it, but it wasn't like addressed that much after. It wasn't like he didn't go confront, the situation. It was just like, it was just done, and he's just like, oh, that's weird. And which I think is more of a normal reaction to something like that. I feel like it's, oh, that's strange. You just blow it off in your head, not thinking it could be something worse. And, that's, I feel like more of a natural thing. Now, I will say the one thing that I don't think was natural about it is I can hang in my house with it being darker. Mm-hmm. Like if we're recording, I kind of like it to be like, I don't have any lights on or anything. It's usually during the day, so I just have natural. But like, I get so frustrated sometimes watching these horror movies that are just dark. Mm-hmm. And I get why they're doing it to try to, but it's just like, just turn on your damn light.
Yeah.
You got a cell phone, turn the light on. Like, come on. Yeah. But,
I still maintain that like the scariest or one of the best formulas for creating a tense and scary scene is to have the camera follow somebody who's walking through the dark with a weak flashlight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so like when they're in the basement and all he has is the flashlight and they're kind of like looking around and like the camera is always just like frustratingly just to the side of where you really want to be able to see. Mm-hmm. That is such a perfect way to make me be on the edge of my seat for a scene. And so I kind of liked the way that they set those up, even though, you have the option of like, well, yeah, just hit the light switch, but right. Makes for good cinema.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely get it, but it's like, if that happens in real life, just turn on a light.
Yeah.
That's my warning to everyone. But I do feel like they must have like also had a little bit of inspiration from like Insidious in a way. Which, thinking about it, I don't know if Insidious came out before 2015. Yeah, it did. Because there's a scene in Insidious where they're walking through the hall with a camera that takes pictures and, or it's like I don't know what they're called, but it's like they change the lens. So it's like dark and then you see something dark and see something and that a jump's coming. And because I watched Insidious a few times, watching this, like when the way they filmed and like we're going around corners, and doing all that, like I just knew a jump was coming. And a lot of the times there wasn't one there. It was just kind of like helping build that suspense up. So it's definitely like that was borrowed from, or influenced, by them, which is a good way to build up suspense. If you don't have to scare them every single time you do that trick. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, I appreciate that. Like, you don't have to freak us out you were freaking us out by not freaking us out.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And just spending time in that anticipation is just uncomfortable, you know?
Torture alone.
Yeah. But yeah, in general, I thought all the scenes where they were down in the basement were really well done and really creepy, and were just like kind of well paced, and everything about it was good. The movie, or the documentary, the movie, to me kind of had two parallel stories. One was the reporting after the fact, and then one was like the events of that night. And so the big payoff of like the story of the friends was it was like the sequence where it was the filming inside the house the night when everything went down, and it was mostly like shaky and staticky and hard to make out what was going on. And then at one point you kind of see people in the attic in like these black robes, and one guy is hanging, and then the people in the black robes are coming near the cameraman, and then it seems like he gets hanged too. And then it just kind of cuts, and Sarah's doing her interview, and then says she's going to her room to rest, but then that the reporter and her crew should really go to the house and see it. So then the crew try to decide to go, and then one of the guys is behind, and he's watching more of the footage, and then you find out, you know, that Sarah's been dead the whole time, and obviously the ones going to the house are in danger. And then there's kind of a closing sequence number 2 in presumably the present, where the reporter and the reporter and the cameraman are back at the hotel, and then they apparently get attacked by the same people in black robes. So the movie did not explain a lot. They did not give a lot of information about what was going down in the house, or if it was haunted, you know, ghosts or demons or hauntings or apparitions or what. But I kind of think that's okay.
Yeah, I think, I agree with that. I think it's okay to not do that. One, because I feel like it's pretty good movie. Like I'm pretty interested in watching the Hell House LLC 2 and 3, which, you know, maybe they get into that, maybe they don't, but it's okay to leave it up to mystery. Like we're both like, we both kind of know that's what horror is. You know, not everyone has to survive. You know, it's not a blockbuster film where the hero survives. Like that's just not part of what we watch. You know, what horror movies are, and not knowing everything about what happened just kind of adds to the stress. It's like, is Sarah part of this? Or, you know, like you just try to figure out where it all came from, and it just leaves it up to the viewer's imagination, and that's okay.
Yeah, and then when it's all over, you don't really have any sense of like closure, or everything's going to be okay, or the danger's over. Right. It's just, what just happened? Yeah. Which is a good way for a horror movie to end, in my opinion. And that's one thing too that really stood out to me as being different from kind of the old horror movies that we've been watching, is typically those really old ones all have some sort of like positive resolution at the end. And so it was very refreshing to me to watch one that didn't. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, you know, it's all forms of horror that's out there. So, I mean, and I think with this movie, there was definitely like some gaps between switching from the documentary crew, like interviewing people. Like there were just a couple spots that I just got a little confused on, like with, like, they said this person ended up dying after, and it was just a little strange, just trying to figure out how they got there and how they got out. But, you know, overall with what they were trying to accomplish, like, I feel like I'm more lenient to like allowing like some confusion there, because it more than likely is on my part, for one. But for two, like if the meat of your story is good, then I mean, the idea of a group of friends renting out this hotel because they want to do a haunted house. I mean, it's a moneymaker. You know, it's just a creepy looking hotel. It just all kind of works out. Like, that's a smart idea for a movie, and it's not like I didn't feel like it was too generic, even if it's found footage. You know, I don't feel like it was too generic. You know, it was just pretty legit. Some of the reviews I was reading about this movie, like, it has pretty good reviews, but a few of them was talking about like didn't keep up to the hype and just all this. And it's like I know we were just a few years away from started the podcast in 2017, but it was like, I didn't know there was a hype to this movie at all. So it's like, this is beyond hype for me because there was none, so, watching it without knowing much about it, it just seemed like a good catch.
Yep. Yeah, definitely one that I will recommend and that I will watch again. Yeah. So, yeah.
This is a Halloween movie, dude.
Yeah, for sure.
Like Halloween time movie. This is 100% on our list.
Yep.
That was definitely a good find.
But yeah, I'm definitely glad we took this little diversion and did a bonus episode this week. I'm glad we got to watch this movie. And next week we will be back delving back into our 100 Years of Horror regularly scheduled programming.
1940s, right? Yeah. 1940s. Yep. But if anyone has any recommendations, reach out to us. They're thehorrificpod@gmail.com. I'll probably respond to those because...
Also, El Presidente has no time.
That's true.
Not a tiempo.
You don't become an El Presidente and have time. That's just... If you guys think that, then you're a bunch of... I'm just kidding. I got aggressive. As the governor, I got aggressive.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.